กลับมาพบกันอีกครั้งหนึ่งนะคะตอนนี้เราจะมาดูในหัวข้อโอกาสของการนำ VR เทคโนโลยีมาเป็นโซลูชันในการติดต่อสื่อสารนะคะโดยเฉพาะในยุคนี้ที่เราเจอโควิดเข้าไปอาจจะทำให้มีผลกระทบต่อการทำงานหลายคนอาจจะต้องมีการ work from home นะคะเพราะฉะนั้นเทคโนโลยีเหล่านี้จะตอบโจทย์อย่างไรนะคะไปฟังในหัวข้อต่อไปกันเลยค่ะ and next is a topic on VR to onboard new employees and maintain company culture. We are very delighted to have Mr. Ken Zola, Professor of Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Berklee College of Music joining us. And the session will be moderated by Mr. Pongsiri Hetrakul, Director of Nylon Thailand and Time Out Bangkok.
ขอบคุณครับ So hello again. So this session for now would be how to implement VR technology to onboard company culture and help maintain the company culture for today. So as you can see clearly, the COVID pandemic has changed, has forced companies to readjust their working habits and their workflow. Everybody has stay at home, work at home. This situation is so challenging for companies to maintain their culture since every employees of the companies haven't met in real life. Also, not to mention the students who have attended virtual class is also facing the same challenge as well. Now, VR technology, how it could become an ideal solution to connect people during this difficult time. We have today with us Mr. Ken Zola, professor from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Berklee College of Music, teaches VR at Day2 University. Hello and good morning, Mr. Ken.
Good morning and good evening to you.
Good morning at your time. Okay, so this session would be dividing into your presentation for the first section, and then we will go into Q&A afterwards. So I will now hand the mic to you, Ken.
All right. Good evening again. It's nice to be here. I am in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I usually get up early in the morning, so this is a nice time for me to be speaking with folks overseas. It's also the beginning of school season here at MIT, so it's a very exciting time. Some of the students are coming back to campus. Many of them are coming in by Zoom from their homes, and we're all innovating in a time of crisis, much like your conference title describes. So let me first tell you a little bit about, here we go. Just gonna quickly adjust my screen settings here. I'm going to talk about my MIT classwork. I'm going to give you two examples of student projects that came out of my class. And I'm going to talk about how those led me to get to know people who were doing virtual reality in the workplace, which leads to the topic of how we create company culture. So let me just pause for a second since we're doing this by Zoom and I'm far away. I just want to make sure everything's working. You're seeing my slides. You can hear me?
Yes, we hear you clearly, and also your slides is already on the screen.
Good. And by the way, I enjoy being interrupted. I don't know if you folks are using the chat function, if you want to type messages in the chat, or I have a WhatsApp connection going with one of your organizers. Feel free to interrupt me at any time, and I'm happy to make this interactive, but I will stop at about 30 after the hour and open it up for general Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, if myself as well, if I have some of the questions to you, I'll allow me to interrupt you during the presentation then.
All right, sounds good. Just a little bit about me. So I mostly teach entrepreneurship to freshmen at MIT. In fact, just yesterday, I met a new group of incoming students, all in their very first day of school at MIT. It was very exciting. And they all want to learn how to build startups and be entrepreneurs and change the world. I began as a computer scientist, so I'm got a technical background. I did some work at a thing called MIT Project Athena, which was a complex effort to network together a bunch of computers before the internet existed. From there, I did several startups myself. including many focused on the financial services industry, which is where I'm continuing to consult today, which is where some of these workplace lessons came from. And as you heard in the introduction, I also teach at Berklee College of Music, which is right here in Boston next to MIT. And my friends at Berklee approached me and said, well, since you teach entrepreneurship to MIT engineers, do you think you could also help us teach entrepreneurship to musicians? Because we want musicians to better understand the tech economy, and we think that musicians and MIT engineers would work well together. And that's been a delightful collaboration. And one of the best ways we've collaborated is in virtual reality, because getting a musician who understands storytelling, emotional arcs, immersion, and Berklee is more than just music. They have a conservatory with a theater and dance and film scoring majors. So the Berklee students really understand how to create an experience and how to bring the creative aspect to their work. And it's been a wonderful collaboration. Most of the more interesting work I've seen done in my life, both at MIT and everywhere, is when people from lots of different backgrounds come together and collide in unexpected ways, where you get out of your silo and you bring people together. And I'm sure if you've been focusing in this conference on innovation, you've heard many talks of serendipitous discoveries and ways in which people from different persuasions can work together to create new things. So one of the classes I'm going to teach, I mentioned that I teach entrepreneurship. One of my classes is also focused specifically on virtual reality and immersive experiences. And it is a class that will have students from 3 different schools all joining together. And we are going to teach the class in VR. Well, it's a class about how to teach in VR. So this is sort of a recursive, self-referential thing. The thing we are going to be building in this class is the thing that's going to allow us to come together in this class. And we will use some crude tools at first. We'll rely a little bit on Zoom and Mozilla Hubs or VR Chat or other existing platforms where people from different locations can gather in the same room. But the idea is I'm going to challenge our students to build something better and find ways where we can immerse ourselves in a classroom experience while we're all isolated. You know, I understand that many of you are together in the same room there in Thailand, which is wonderful. I am envious that you folks are managing the pandemic better than we are in the United States. We are still not gathering in person at all. I will never see any of my students in person this fall. And so the only way to teach this class is with people on Zoom from their homes. And that's why this is a perfect time to run a class like this, where we're challenging the students to build a better way to be present. Everybody's tired of the old way. Now, I've run this class for a few years. I don't know if any of you recognize this gentleman here. This is Cayman, who I understand has helped organize this conference, might have even spoken to you earlier today. Cayman, as you know, is from Thailand and came to MIT to do his graduate work. And he took my class a couple of years ago. Here he is in my classroom. You can see me sitting there at a table behind him and one of the other students in the class and a guest speaker who I had brought in. That's actually a guy named Jason Parks, who has a VR startup. They're standing in front of a lovely window where you can see the Charles River in Cambridge behind them. So if you're wondering how did I get to be connected to the Thailand startup community, you can thank Cayman and this collaborative class where people meet each other and do interesting projects together. And I'm actually going to show you, this is why you have to be careful what homework you do when you're taking a college class, because your professor is going to remember you forever and will repeat your homework to your friends. So Cayman and his team worked on a virtual reality adaptation of Shakespeare. And I'll show you about a 30-second clip of this. This will have audio. It's mostly just ambient music in the background, no one's speaking. So if you can't hear voices, that's normal. So I'll just take a 5-second pause and look around to see if anyone's trying to get my attention. I think we're in good shape. And I will hit play in a second, and we'll roll this about 30 seconds worth. So I love how they quote Shakespeare saying, "All the world's a stage," and their project was to create a new stage in virtual reality. And you could see the images which were evocative of how we imagine Shakespeare's characters, the environment in which they lived. And if you're a student of history or literature, to be able to go into Shakespeare's world and live in the same environment that Shakespeare's characters lived in can be a very powerful experience. So this is a great example of something that our students do. I'll show you one more example. I'm sorry, I'm replaying this. Another example, which is called Painting Life, which was made by two of my students, Luis Zanforlin and Wyatt Roy. And this is about understanding art. And I'll leave this up for a moment because I think this is nicely written and speaks for itself. So a lot of people, when creating VR experiences, have looked at the process of understanding art and interacting with artists. Most of us experience art by hanging it on our wall or visiting a museum. And these students asked, what if we could go into the artist's life? So I'm going to roll this video. There is speaking in this one, so you will be able to hear a narrator talk. So I'm going to mute myself while I play.
Hello, welcome. I am a sculptor. Emma made me. She calls me Noodle Arm. Emma is an artist, and you are in her memories. Have a look around. Is a photograph of a painting still a painting? Is a painting of a photo still a photo? Is an imaginary object built in real life still imaginary? Behind every artwork is a story. Behind every story is a person. Find them.
So this was a lovely piece, and you may have noticed some of the imagery there was done using a technology called photogrammetry, where they went into the artist's studio and bedroom and took a high quality 3D scan of the room and then rendered it in this animated looking environment, which was actually, it wasn't animation, it was an actual photograph of the room. So you walk into the museum, you see a painting, then you can choose to walk through the painting and go into the artist's home or the artist's studio. And then there are fantasy elements which are animated where you go into the artist's imagination and dream world as well. There's a beautiful piece that they are continuing to develop and have released on, I believe it's Steam or various other app stores, and I can get you a link to this if you want to see it or try it yourself.
Hello. Hello.
And some of the issues you're seeing here repeating, and this is where this works into workplace culture, are the notions of immersion, empathy, and transformation. How do you get immersed into a scene? How do you have genuine empathy for other human beings who are part of that world, even when they're not in the same room as you? And transformation, how do you transform yourself out of your current mindset and into some new mindset? And this is where virtual reality could be such a powerful tool. I say could be because a lot of this is unknown still. This is an unproven technology. It seems fun to put on glasses or put on a headset and put yourself into a VR world. But does that really change the experience? And this is the sort of research we're trying to do. We could measure outcomes at work. We could even put on biological sensors and measure people's heart rate or galvanic skin response or other biometric markers. So we can actually measure how people are responding aside from just interviewing them and see what's different about being in virtual reality versus just watching a high quality 2D image. So the reason this became so interesting to some of the companies that I work with and some of the companies that visit MIT is the notion of onboarding new employees. So those two works you just saw, where you went into Shakespeare's world or when you went into the world of an artist. So when you show up for work in the morning, when you walk into your office building, when you sit around in a conference room with your colleagues, what is that scene like? We all have a sense of what the physical trappings are there, the furniture in the room, the color of the walls, whether they have plants, how high in the building, is it in a skyscraper? You know, the setting of how we all gather together kind of helps create a culture. If you are someone who visits customers in their home, if you go door to door working in people's houses, that's a different experience as well. So how do we create that and train people to thrive in various different company cultures when they are isolated and when we're in the middle of a crisis? And you know, a year ago, a lot of these companies were experimenting with virtual reality, thinking, well, this is kind of interesting. And it was an issue of what I call technology push. Now that we have the quarantine upon us, the future has come crashing in. And rather than having to push this technology into the future has come to us demanding the technology. And if this is a conference focused on innovation and entrepreneurship, I'm sure you've seen this in a lot of examples. There are times when a lone inventor sits in his or her lab and invents something and says, here's some technology that's really exciting. I need to convince the world they want it. And that's what I call technology push. So many of my MIT students are technologists trying to push their work out of the lab and into the world. But the flip side of that, and you need both sides, is market pull, where customers are hungry for a change and they want to do something different, or they're ready to do something different. People were tired of having to figure out how to hail a taxi. And so when Uber came along, they said, oh, that sounds great. And they told their friends, and you can just click some buttons on a phone and a car arrives. Customers started demanding that. And that's what drove the acceleration of the technology. Workplace training, onboarding new employees, this is happening now. And part of this is not just Zoom fatigue, but a need for customer empathy. Companies that have a high customer service model need to understand what their customers are going through. So the use case that I was describing to Cayman and your conference organizers when they asked me to speak to you was a large financial services company in Boston, and they have many phone support representatives. So if you're a customer, you can pick up a telephone and dial this company and ask them questions about your stocks and your savings and your retirement and how you're managing your money. The pandemic brought a lot of market volatility and anxiety. Everybody was concerned about their investments and whether they were making money or whether they were losing money. People were changing jobs or they were becoming unemployed, and they were concerned about their retirement savings. So all of a sudden, there was a lot of need to run more phone calls with customers, and they needed to hire a lot more people quickly. And yet everyone was in lockdown, in quarantine. They couldn't meet people, they couldn't talk to them, they couldn't train them in person. And fortunately, they had already been developing a virtual reality app to allow a phone representative to better understand a customer's perspective. So in virtual reality, you put on a headset and then you go into the customer's world. Much like we went into Shakespeare's world or an artist's world, they created some personas. So imagine that you're a father and you have 2 young children at home, and you have a lot of laundry you're trying to wash, and you have some dishes in the sink, and you have a sick mother in the other room, and you're worried that you don't have enough money to pay the medical bills. And so you call this financial partner and say, can you help me manage my money? And the financial partner has gone through a hypothetical training where they're in your home and they see what's going on in that moment. And they hear your children screaming, they see your mother in the other room, they know what's going on. And they can see the implications of the advice they give. So they have these different scenarios where you say, well, in order to withdraw your money now, you have to go to the post office and fill out a form and mail it or something like that. I'm just sort of making up an example. But they talk through how the customer is going to respond and see the advice that they're giving and see how that affects the customer's life and how there are really strong implications for making a mistake. And that it encourages the call center reps to be more creative in how they solve customers' problems. So they onboarded hundreds of new call center representatives using this method. They shipped headsets all over the globe. And it's been wildly the ratings that they get from customers and the quality of the outcomes that are gotten out of these customer calls have increased dramatically.
Ken,
so that's my quick case study. What's next? In addition to educating the call center reps, educating the customers themselves on how they can envision their financial future, letting them envision scenarios. Maybe they want to buy a vacation home or they want to look at what their retirement might be like. Complex data visualization for employees of the firm, and educating them on new technology trends. Quantum computing is an excellent example where they're using VR to educate their workforce on what's quantum computing and why is the physics of quantum physics so interesting for how computing is going to work. You can create simulations where in VR you get really tiny and can understand the world from the perspective of a qubit, which is a fun little side project as well. And you know, workforce training is nothing new. This is one of the oldest workplace training virtual reality machines in the world. I don't know if there are any airline pilots out there. This is a flight simulator. And interestingly, I have a retired pilot in my class this fall who's joining, who wants to build VR simulations, building on the way pilots in flight simulators have to make complex decision-making under pressure. It's a massively complex situation. There's a physiological response when you're being tossed around. These flight simulators, as you can see, have motors and actuators that jostle you up and down. So this is old technology, but we've got all new horizons ahead of us. And we're looking forward to what our students are going to build next and what you're going to build next. So the runway is ahead, ready for you to take off. I'm happy to be your guide and help. I love hearing questions. If any of you want to email me, you're welcome to do so at this email address. And I'm happy to take your questions now.
Do you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Right. I think the first question would be just for the clarification though. So on the example that you gave to us, the financial firm that they want to have a telephone staff to be in the customer world. Well, what exactly is that? What exactly is how one of the staff can be in customer world? So you mean that customer is broadcasting 360 from their home and for the staff to see how the environment of his or her home would be like?
Oh, that's a good question. So that's not a live customer broadcasting. They hired actors to do simulations based on the profiles of typical customers. So they have several practice rooms that you go into where you have to, it's sort of like a flight simulator where you're not on a real plane. You're not talking to a real customer. You're going through a scripted simulation where they've come up with a bunch of typical challenges that a phone rep might receive, and you have to learn how to respond to those challenges.
Oh, I see, I see. So it's a simulation kind of customer, right? Not the real customer.
Right. Right, but
Okay.
it actually is a real human being. When you put the goggles on, you see a real human being in what looks like their real bedroom or living room or wherever they're calling from.
Then what do you see as the limitation for this kind of approach? Like, okay, we know that okay, COVID is a limitation for us to be together in person for sure. But now we have a new platform. Then what are the limitations for this kind of solution? So if we met our customer in person in VR, then we may have to appear to each other as I would say like avatar. Then would that
Yep.
would that allow you to know exactly what each other thinking or each other emotion, because well it's occur in avatar. What do you see the right approach on doing this, and what are the limitations of those?
So that's an excellent question, and goes to the question of empathy. How do we create empathy with another human being? How do we form a connection with another human being? And can virtual reality come close to recreating an in-person experience? As with a lot of these things, the things that are limitations are also possibly opportunities to go beyond the limitations of the physical world. So let me first talk about the negative side, the limitations. Bandwidth is an issue, just latency and quality of resolution. As you say, having a really high quality 3D moving image of another person is challenging now. So we often have to use avatars, which can look fake, and they aren't really convincing. And it's not as high quality an experience. Also, the weight factor of having a headset on your head, and some people claim they get dizzy from them. So there are serious limitations to how much you could do, which is why using it for training is ideal, where you then later just have a live phone call on the phone with another person the same way you always would, but you're able to have a better in-person phone call having gone through that training. I too am a believer that live in-person human contact is irreplaceable. And there are things that happen, we might not even understand all of the senses. You know, we claim there are 5 senses. There might be things going on when we're in the room with another person. For all I know, I've got complex sensors that are responding to magnetic fields that other people emit. I'm being a little silly and making up things, but I don't pretend to understand how socialization and human interaction really work. It could be way more complex than we can rebuild in software. But the good news is, so when I said that limitations often can force us to invent something better in some ways, we are limited with our physical presence, our appearance, the way we speak. There are people who might not like the way they look. There are people who might have speech disabilities. You've all heard about the crisis with racial injustice in this country, the way people with different skin color interact with one another, the way men interact with women. There are some things that are broken about the way social interactions work today. And what if we could create a high quality avatar that got to a person's essence and allowed us to strip away some of the physical markers that get in the way of healthy conversation. Why do I have to look like this oval-shaped thing with two eyes and a nose and a mouth? What if I looked like an artistic representation of my ideas? Could that create an even more interesting form of communication with the person on the other end? This is really esoteric stuff, and I don't think anyone's got a handle on that yet, but it's sort of lovely to dream about.
Yeah, sure. I think facial expression is very complex and also very like difficult to imitate in virtual world. Instead of that, what I saw sometimes is that they're trying to imitate the emotional expression in real world into something like emoticon or something like graphics that can present easier than in virtual world. Is that what you see as a future as well?
Yeah, and you've seen crude versions of that in Zoom. For example, you've probably all seen this there's a applause emoji that while you're on Zoom, you could click a button and it shows a little animated set of hands clapping. I think there's a thumbs up emoji where while you're in Zoom, everybody can click, the thumb goes up. So we've seen very primitive ways where people can create technology shortcuts that will allow you to convey their emotions. There's a colleague of mine at MIT does, Cynthia Brazil at the Media Lab, does a lot of work on how machines convey emotions to people. And you've all seen science fiction movies where robots appear to look happy or angry, and or where you've interacted with avatars on screen that appear to convey emotional reaction. And I think we're only at the beginning of that research, and that's really important work.
Then what would happen is if we are at the end of the COVID, let's say, and then COVID is gone, is this direction would develop more as their own category kind of human interaction, or do you think it's just being back to normal? What do you think, which direction would happen after COVID?
Yep. So I think we're never going back to the way it was. I think, to quote Winston Churchill, who once said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." And the notion that Schumpeter wrote about long ago of creative destruction, that once there is a forest fire, new things grow back that are different from what was there before. I think so many of the rituals we had for attending things in person are changing now. You know, if you'd asked me a year ago whether I wanted to speak to you in Thailand, I would have been hesitant. I would have said, nah, I don't really think it's high quality to have some screen of me. You know, let's wait until I'm going to make a trip to Asia and I'll come in person. And it's obviously a lot of work to get on an airplane and pack a suitcase and stay in a hotel and how to navigate a new city. That's a much different experience than I'm sitting in my office right now doing something that I probably would not have done if you had asked me a year ago. But we've all been forced to break barriers and try new things. There are a lot of people speculating that the commercial real estate market might forever be changed because people aren't going to build as many offices because people thought that they all needed to come and sit together in a building. You probably, if you follow US politics, you probably saw that both of our presidential candidates just conducted a convention with their party. And the Democratic convention was almost completely virtual. The candidate never appeared in a giant stadium where they had to hire all these, last year they would have to hire all these people and they would bring in balloons and they would serve refreshments and it was crowded and you'd have to park your car to get there. And, you know, it was kind of annoying. Nobody really liked doing that. And I think people realized that they got to see the candidate close up. They could look carefully at his face. It wasn't so bad to do it from home. And maybe we don't need these big, loud, obnoxious conventions in order to elect a new candidate. So I think a lot of things are never going to go back, that we sort of forced ourselves to stretch our imagination and build muscles to interact in new ways. And I think the appetite for that's only going to get stronger. Nobody wants to sit in a car in a traffic jam waiting to drive across town to go to sit in some building if they could do it in VR from home.
Right. But do you see the participant engagement? Let's use your example on political activity then. Then like would people really engage in that? Because like when they're on the screen or they're on VR, they can just leave anywhere they want. They can just like going to have a coffee, a cup of coffee, or going to the restroom. Is that also a disadvantage on using this platform in terms of participant engagement as well?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point that we really need to focus on. You heard me say at the very beginning of this talk that when I bring together students from MIT and Berkeley and Harvard, the best part of the class is the collision of different skill sets and different interests. And often those serendipitous contacts happen accidentally when I'm not trying for them to happen. So I would always open my classroom a half hour early and tell the students to arrive early. I would have a Berkeley musician there playing music, and people would just walk around and make conversation. The conversations that happen outside of the script, to use the language of a filmmaker, like a filmmaker has a script where they think they know what's going to happen. When people go off script and improvise is often where the most interesting work happens. So our challenge in this quarantine world is how people can go off script and how they can look at something that they don't think they're looking at, or they don't think they should be looking at, and how they can have a random conversation that they didn't even know they wanted to have, or meet a person that they didn't even know they wanted to meet. Building technologies and avatars or random room assigners or whatever it is that's going to allow us to do that, I think is the next great frontier that we really have to work on. And in talking about startups and entrepreneurship, I often give advice to my entrepreneurs that if you go visit a customer or an investor, the most important part of your talk is often what happens after you think the talk is over. And then maybe someone comes up to you and says, okay, nice job. Let me walk you to the elevator and I'll say goodbye. Those couple of moments where some random person walks up to you and walks you to the parking lot or the elevator or whatever, that's often what's going to make the difference between whether that customer thinks favorably of you than what you thought you were saying during your PowerPoint presentation. So recreating that is vitally important.
Okay, but since you have mentioned your class then, well, I think the format is very interesting. So your class is basically gather all the students into a VR space, and then let them also create the VR product out of that space, right? Can you like maybe tell us more about the format of this class and how is it going? How's the feedback of the class? Maybe if like some of us here want to run kind of that class direction as well.
Yes, so the class is starting on Friday. So I can't give you feedback yet about how it's going. I can tell you though that we've been planning it all summer. Yes, Friday will be our first class. It's an iteration of a class that we've run in person before, which is how I met Cayman and Jason Parks and some of the others who you're going to hear from or maybe have already heard from. But this is the first time we're doing it in VR, and we honestly don't know how the feedback's going to go. We hope that the students are creative enough that they will be able to build better experiences. But in terms of how we're going to do it, I sort of draw the analogy of sending a bunch of artists into a room with black walls and a bunch of cans of paint and telling the artists, look around at this room you're all in together. This is boring. go make it better. So when I look at Mozilla Hubs or VR chat or some of these other environments now where people gather in virtual space, I think they're boring and they should be made better. I think the avatars look really cartoonish and it's not conducive to genuine human emotional complexity. And so we're going to put our students into one of those rooms and say, this is what's broken. Your mission is to fix it. You're going to spend the next few minutes with some really creative people in one of these rooms. Why is this frustrating to you? Why do you feel you're not able to get to know them? And if you were a VR creator, how would you fix this?
So it seems like it's not only the design, like graphic design kind of class, it's also the user experience and user interface a class as well, if you are setting the objective of the class like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the emotional complexity, the storytelling, the sound design, creating the music and the sound effects to evoke certain emotional responses. It's a very complex experience with lots of different parts.
And would a student like from your experience, like the work like Camin's, Shakespeare's VR or Painting Life, that is all done in one class in like a semester?
Yes.
Amazing.
And a semester here is 13 weeks. So we're starting this week and then we end in early December.
Right. The work is I think the quality is very high though, so to complete it in just 13 weeks. So very impressive student that you have there.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that they work on a lot on weekends and nights. Some of it they continue to work on. Actually, that video I sent you of Painting Life, that was a higher quality video they made later. They did all that imagery during the class, but the video you saw itself and the product now is a result of many months of work that they did after the class ended.
Right. Okay, so since we are now into the end of the session, though, I think the session here summarized many things. It gives us many answers that we want the answer to, and also I think since this industry is actually in just a very, I would say, like primitive kind of stage. We will still have to experiment a lot more moving on forward, but and also we would for sure having so much question later on. So Ken, if we want to contact you or giving you some question later on, I think we also have your email on the presentation, right?
Yes,
sure.
You do, and I'd be happy to hear from you. So don't be afraid to write.
Sure. All right. But for now, then, thank you very much, Ken. It's glad to we're so honored to have you here. Glad to have you with us since even though it's a very early morning of yours. Thank you very much again.
Well, it was my pleasure. I hope this was helpful. I enjoyed doing this. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
เอาละค่ะก็ต้องขอบคุณนะคะสำหรับ Professor Ken Zolot แล้วก็ขอบคุณ Moderator ของเราด้วยนะคะคุณพงศรีนั่นเองค่ะเอาละค่ะในช่วงนี้พักกันสักครู่นะคะและช่วงต่อไปจะเป็นการบรรยายในหัวข้อสุดท้ายแล้วนะคะสำหรับวันที่ 2 ของการจัดงาน Startup Thailand แล้วก็ Innovation Thailand Expo 2020 นะคะ The Science of Goosebumps Music in Virtual Reality จะเป็นอย่างไรกันนั้นอีกสักครู่กลับมาติดตามกันค่ะ